Lesson for Mr. Rodriguez's online class. Today we're going to look at defining poetry, sort of thinking about what poetry is, and then we're going to take a closer look at a poem and see how the author uses both diction and imagery to convey their meaning. So we're going to start off by looking at some quotes, some different quotes about poetry, and I'm going to try and explain this for you guys working through on the Edsby assignment. There are 7 quotes in total. You're going to pick one of these quotes, and then you're going to choose that quote and explain whether you agree with it, why you agree with it, what does that quote mean to you, and so you're just sort of explaining your understanding of the quote. So here's the first one. We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion and medicine and law, business, engineering, and these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. And that's a quote from the Dead Poet Society. It's a really good movie if you haven't seen it. Poetry is what gets lost in translation, and that's by Robert Frost. Then we have, out of the quarrel with others, we make rhetoric. Out of the quarrel with ourselves, we make poetry. Now, a quarrel is an argument, and rhetoric is sort of the logic. Remember your rhetorical appeals? So we get logic from arguing with other people, but from arguing with ourselves, internal conflict, he's saying we find poetry. Then we have number 4, Poetry is Man's Rebellion Against Being What He Is by James Branch Campbell. Poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, which the reader recognizes as his own, and that's by Salvatore Quasimodo. And so that's talking about how the poet expresses feelings he feels like are his, but the reader feels like they could be theirs as well. Then we have number 6. Mathematics and poetry are the utterance of the same power in imagination, only that in the one case it is addressed in the head, and in the other it is the heart. So it's trying to get to the root of where poetry comes from. And our last one is, poetry is an orphan of silence. The words never quite equal the experiences behind them. Charles Simic. So now I'd like you to pause for just a few moments, pick out one of these that you feel applies, that you understand the best, that you agree with best, and explain what the quote means to you, why you picked it, and what it means to you. So pause now. Okay, hopefully you've finished and now you're back. So let's look at a little bit about our author. So we're going to be exploring diction and imagery, and we're going to do that with a poem by Edward Hirsch. He's a professor of English and a published author of many poems, essays, and books. His collection of verse, Wild Gratitude, was awarded the National Book Critics Circle Award in 1986. Hirsch has also earned a Guggenheim Fellowship and a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. One of Hirsch's most popular books has been his surprise bestseller, How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry. So we're going to read Hirsch's poem, Fast Break, and pay attention to how he is using diction and imagery. If I'm reading through this too quickly, or you just want to be able to look at it on your own, obviously I'm going to send the PowerPoint to you, but this is an assignment that is also on your Springboard online. I've sort of adapted a couple things from it, but it does have the poem there, so you can have it narrated by the actual Springboard online text. Fast Break, in memory of Dennis Turner, 1946 to 1984, by Edward Hirsch. A hook shot kisses the rim and hangs there, helplessly, but it doesn't drop. And for once, our gangly starting center boxes out his man and times his jump perfectly, gathering the orange leather from the air like a cherished possession, and spinning around to throw a strike to an outlet who is already shoveling. An underhand pass towards the other guard scissoring past a flat-footed defender who looks stunned and nailed to the floor in the wrong direction, trying to catch sight of a high gliding dribble of a man, letting the play develop in front of him in slow motion, almost exactly like the coach's drawing on the blackboard. Both forwards racing down the court the way that forwards should, fanning out and filling the lanes in tandem, moving together as brothers passing the ball. Between them, without a dribble, without a single bounce, hitting the hardwood, until the guard finally lunges and commits to the wrong man, while the power forward explodes past them in a fury, taking the ball in the air by himself now and laying it gently against the glass for a layup, but losing his balance in the process, inexplicably falling, hitting the floor with a wild, headlong motion for the game he loved like a country, and swiveling back to see the orange blower floating perfectly through the net. So that is our poem, and now we're going to have 3 questions we're going to go through to sort of get a basic understanding of this poem before you dig a little deeper into it. So, what is the effect of writing the poem as a long sentence? I bet you didn't realize that when you were listening to me or reading it along yourself. It is one sentence, lots of commas, but just one period. So what is the effect of this being one sentence? Think about it in the context of a fast break in basketball. So how does that sort of connect? And I think you can get there. So here's the next question. If you want to pause and try and answer that one, we'll look at the next question. Okay, welcome back. So this poem was written to honor Dennis Turner, the author's friend who died. How does the information affect your understanding of the poem's closing image? So how could his friend dying, who the author wrote this poem for, relate to the end of this poem? And you'll have to think a little deeply, but I think if you pay attention to those last 2-3 couplets, it'll really help you out. So you want to pause there, take a few moments. Okay, welcome back. So let's look at our third question. Why might the author have chosen to write a poem in couplets? So you might need to Google couplets. What are couplets? Well, I'll give you a little bit of info and you can get more information. I'm sure it'll help you probably answer the question. Why might the author have chosen to write these in couplets? Well, couplets are a pair of lines that are meant to be read together. And so how does that add on to the text? Now, this is a big part of the assignment coming up next. So I'm going to ask you to pause before we get started. Okay, so you have on your EDSB assessment, you're going to have a blank for each one of these boxes so you can complete this twist strategy. So what you're going to be doing in a twist strategy is you're going to be looking for the tone, the author's attitude toward the topic, word choice, that gets us into our diction. How did he use specific words to convey the meaning? Why this word rather than that word? Then imagery, what image is especially significant in conveying his attitude toward the topic? What is that image that just really gets that idea across? And then style, how do syntax, imagery, and diction work together to communicate the main idea of the poem? Remember, syntax is sentence structure, so we know that this is one really long sentence. So how does that one really long sentence do that? How does the imagery he uses in that sentence and the word choices he used build that together? So that is going to be kind of a combination of how your last 2 boxes work together to create a style for the poem, how it creates the main idea. And you have to think, what is the main idea? Now, some of those questions we answered earlier are definitely intended to help you answer that question. And so for our final question here, it's theme. What is the author's comment on the subject of the poem? What is he trying to say about basketball, about this moment that he's talking about? And I'll give you a hint. Think about the moment he's talking about. You can also Think about the dedication to his friend. Those things could definitely lead into giving you a really, really good answer here. So next, I'm going to ask you to pause for just a moment so we can go into the last question. Okay, welcome back. So pulling the analysis together based on your ideas from the twist. So if you haven't completed the twist, you're going to have a hard time with this question. Write a paragraph explaining the effect of the diction and imagery in the poem. Think about the tense of verbs and the adjectives the poet chose to use. And if you've completed your twist, please don't skip around. If you've completed your twist, your thesis is going to be probably a combination of the theme and style box. Those other boxes are going to lead to your evidence and explanation, the points that you think really help make that theme and style box come to life. And then in conclusion, now I'm going to tell you a trick. Mr. Rodriguez loves to give a strategy or two. You might start talking about the theme, then give some pieces of evidence from earlier parts of the box, and then in conclusion talk about how those elements in conjunction with the theme created the style. Or you could do it the reverse. You could talk about what is the author's style in writing, what things did he use to get that style across, and how do those things contribute to the theme. But if you think about it as pieces fitting together, all of this will make so much more sense and be a lot easier. I really hope you benefited from listening to this explanation of the PowerPoint, and I hope that you really enjoy this poem. I think it's a really neat one for being just one sentence but being so long. Thank you, and remember to be brave, be bold, be creative, be kind, but most of all, be yourself.